been a weird addition for Imperial Knights. With a solid index detachment and a just for fun Grotmus detachment, they've been reliant on points changes and the occasional balance pass for any kind of variety. It's been a fairly one-note army, especially in contrast with Chaos Knights, who got their own full codex earlier this year. Even after the stopgap index that dropped in June, Imperial Knights have been riding high on a playstyle that is, at its core, kinda boring, running more or less the same lists game after game and event after event. I'm amateur robot jock and lozenge kneader Campbell McLaughlin, and today we're gonna find out if the Imperium's favorite giant stompy robots got just a little bit more interesting. Today we're reviewing Codex Imperial Knights. We would like to thank Games Workshop for providing us with a review copy of the Codex. If you want to keep up on the nightly news, both of those are spelled with a silent K by the way, consider subscribing to our channel. To read more about Knights of all varietals, head over to Goonhammer.com. Link in the description. We'd love to say that there's some huge, sweeping changes to how this army is going to look and play, but no matter the exact ratio, it's always going to be about running big frickin' robots with a couple of smaller frickin' robots to run around and do stuff. The big changes to their stat lines already happened with the index update back in June, bringing them in line with Chaos Knights, so the standout changes are going to be a bit more in the weeds. And of those standout changes, we think there's 5 you've got to know. The honor rush is over. Rushing to get honored isn't quite as important as it was before, save for in one detachment. Speaking of, it's way easier to get honored now. There's a new system for becoming honored and gaining its bonuses that's both easier to accomplish and more interesting overall. There's some great detachments to build lists around. Anything that brings more variety to how this army plays is a good thing, and we're happy to finally do something different with it, with detachments that don't just change how you build an army, but how you play it. The new Knight Defender. It's a fantastic addition to the army. It brings the kind of defensive support abilities that nothing else has, filling an interesting gap that we didn't know we were missing. There's also a smattering of datasheet changes to help less played knights see the table. There have definitely been winners and losers in the narrow selection of knights you can pick before, with some getting sidelined for an entire edition. Army rules. Code Chivalric. At the Read Mission Objective step, Imperial Knights get access to the Code Chivalric ability, which lets you pick a deed and a quality. You can randomly roll for these or pick them manually. If you complete your deed, you become honored, gaining 2 command points or 3 command points if you rolled randomly on either table. As for those deeds, those include Lay Low the Tyrant. At the start of the battle, select a character in your opponent's army. If you kill them, you complete this deed at the end of the turn. This is way easier than the index iteration, which forced you to go after your opponent's warlord, and it can be an easy way to get honored quickly. Reclaim the Realm. If, at the end of your opponent's turn, you control more objectives than they do, you become honored. Since you're playing knights, this generally isn't that tall of an order early game, with plenty of fast units that can hop onto objectives and stay there. Reap a Great Tally. If, at the end of the turn, more enemy units died than the current battle round, you become honored. This is another easy one to get around to turn 2, but if you miss your shot early, it's going to get harder and harder. Meanwhile, the qualities are Martial Valor Risen Overall. Each time one of your models shoots or fights, reroll a hit or wound roll. This is your default pick and one of the things that helps make Imperial Knights function. Don't leave home without it. Eager for the Challenge. Add 2 inches to this model's move characteristic and add 1 to advance and charge rolls. You probably won't see this one often unless you're playing the Questoris Companions detachment, or maybe in some edge cases in Valor Strike Lance. Not that these movement buffs aren't good, but the rerolls are just too useful for an army that often relies on low volume, high quality attacks. Yet shall our legacy be unsullied. Improve the OC of your models by 2 and their leadership by 1. This is great for letting you bully objectives like the index days, but it's still not better than the rerolls. These rules are all fun and thematic, but there's some clear winners here. You're gonna generally pick a deed that's easiest for your army composition and matchup, and almost always go for the Martial Valor quality, as those rerolls are just too good to pass up. Most of your big knights also have a Bondsman ability, which lets them select an armiger within 12 inches to get a datasheet specific buff, which we'll go into later. There's also Super Heavy Walker, which lets you walk through models and walls at the risk of being battle shocked on a die roll of 1. This is pretty necessary for letting your big models get around the table, and it hasn't changed from how it was before. Detachments. Imperial Knights armies have access to 4 detachments in the Codex, plus the Quester Forge pack from Grotmus. We'll get into these in separate detachment-focused videos and detachment-focused articles on Goonhammer.com, but we'll give you the short versions here. Valor Strike Lance is your default detachment, letting you reroll advanced rolls and giving all your knights weapons assault. It mostly focuses on getting your knights up the board, into the fight, and around the table, helping pretty much everything in the process. This is also the only detachment with the Rotate Ion Shield stratagem, so if you are leaning on that, this will be the one for you. Gate Warden Lance is an odd one, forcing you to play defense as your models need to remain on a designated line on the board to get the most out of it. It's unusual and not our favorite, but it's an appreciable attempt to do something different with the army. Questoris Companions is for those who think Honored is so nice they'd like it twice. You get to stack Honored deeds and qualities with the caveat that your enhancements get spent, only reloading after getting Honored again. Spearhead at Arms is an Armature-focused detachment, making the little guy's battle line and letting your Bondsman abilities extend out further and to more armatures per turn. Lastly, Questor Forge Pact is still here and it's still a fun option, if not necessarily the most competitive. If you've got AdMech and want to dip a Mechadendrite into Knights though, it's a fun way to do that. Datasheets. As we mentioned earlier, Imperial Knights had their stats brought down to the Chaos Knight standard in their index earlier this year. If you've been living under a rock for the last few months, the short version is that pretty much everything lost a point of toughness and some OC, but gained more wounds, and your big knights cap out at a 3-up armor save. We also got a new knight in this release, and he's got a jaunty little hat. We're also not going to talk about any of the Imperial Armor Knights. Those are the ones that are heresy models that you happen to be able to use in 40k. They're kind of out of the remit of this codex. I imagine we'll probably still see a bunch of them, but we're just focusing on what's in the codex today. I also think they're mostly very ugly. That's just me. The only new datasheet in this book is the Knight Defender, a Questoris class knight which is sort of like a smaller Castellan, mounting a Plasma Executor and a Conversion Beam Obliterator. It has a 4-up invulnerable save at range rather than the faction's standard 5-up, and its datasheet ability grants a 4-up invulnerable save and the benefit of cover to any Imperial Knights model from your army standing behind it. The wording here is pretty technical. It works if a ranged attack is allocated to an Imperial Knights model and that model is not fully visible to every model in the attacking unit because of the Knight Defender. If your opponent manages to hang a single model around the corner to see the target unobstructed, the ability doesn't work. Emphasizing its defensive role, its Bondsman ability is Defender's Duty, which grants -1 damage, a solid ability that's welcome on any unit. On the offense, it's pretty great. The Plasma Executor is essentially a compact version of the Castellan's Plasma Decimator, reaching out to 36 inches with D6 plus 3 shots at Strength 8, AP 2, Damage 2, and Blast, or ratcheting up the Strength, AP, and damage by 1 in exchange for Hazardous if you go Bravery mode and use the Supercharge profile. It's also got a Conversion Beam Obliterator, also shooting at 36 inches of range with 3 shots at Strength 12, AP 2, and a chunky 4 damage. That gun's also got Sustained Hits D3 and the Conversion Rule, which means it generates critical hits on a 4-up if the target is more than 18 inches away. This is a great set of weapons to stand in your midfield, blasting away at your enemies and providing cover to your backline while armatures scurry around its feet. On to updated datasheets. Let's start with the little dudes and work our way up. Sorry, I've got my own little dude who won't stop screaming at the door. Warglaves lost sustained hits on the charge, but got an extra attack with their strike profile, or 2 on their sweep. This is mostly a wash, and it's kind of the opposite direction as a lot of these rules have been going. The Helverin sees a more significant change. Skyfire Protocols is gone and replaced with Suppression Protocols, which instead imposes a -1 to hit on a non-monster and non-vehicle unit you hit until your next turn. It's still okay, but it was a lot funnier when they were sniping Demon Primarchs with anti-fly 2-up. On to the big dudes and the biggest change to the army. Canis Rex sees a massive nerf, no longer critting on 5s and instead getting the ability to unbattle shock one of your units. That unit can be any Imperial unit, which is a cute little kumbaya moment for all the Emperor botherers out there, but it's a far cry from Canis being able to reliably Shoryuken anything into the sun. Given how much the big dog got around, he probably needed the nerf, but he'll still see play. Sir Hector now gets out via emergency disembarkation, as I guess they moved the eject button on him, and it means he has a little more room to jump out of Canis Rex, at the cost of being more likely to take a mortal wound. The generic Preceptor, a knight I consistently forget exists, also saw some changes. It still picks an enemy unit at the start of the battle to be its least favorite guy, but instead of rerolling hits against it, now you reroll wounds against them, and if you kill that unit, you get to pick a new one. The Bondsman ability also allows armigers to reroll wounds against that quarry, and this can be devastating in something like the Spearhead Arms Detachment, where you can create a castle of armigers aimed to kill a particularly big target. There's also a smattering of smaller changes. Instead of getting an extra reroll, the Paladin now gets extra AP into the closest target, making its stubbers and battle cannon a little bit scarier. The Warden's Bondsman ability is now a more effective one, giving an armiger ignores cover and sustained hits 1. The Gallant gets an extra 3 inches consolidate instead of being -1 to hit in melee, which is a nerf in some circumstances, but it lets you tag units from further away, especially with Moment of Glory in the Questoris Companions detachment. The Castellan sees a subtle but handy little buff, and now it can reroll any damage roll against a monster or vehicle, not just rolls of 1. Lastly, they murdered my poor, beautiful Harpooninator, knocking the Knight Valiant down several pegs. The Thundercoil Harpoon no longer has anti-monster or anti-vehicle, only has 12 inches of range, dropped from damage 12 to damage 10, only hits on a 3-up, and also has Blast, ensuring you don't get to shoot it into combat. It can occasionally cause some mortal wounds to surrounding units, but I'm really gonna miss reliably one-shotting tanks and monsters with this thing. Ultimately, Imperial Knights armies are gonna look very similar to the way they have since the army's inception, but the new detachments offer a wealth of new ways to play. Without army-wide Feel No Pain, they'll be slightly less durable than they were, but you can also expect them to get honored way faster and more consistently. With the changes to Canis and a lesser extent to the Gallant, you can expect to see Knights armies shift even more towards gun lines, relying on the Knights from the Imperial Armor Index for their melee threats. I still don't respect them. The other datasheet changes are pretty minor, save for my poor Valiant, but we think the Defender will find a home in a load of lists. Its defensive abilities will be a nice way to shore up the loss of rotate ion shields in most detachments, and it should serve as a more than credible mid-range threat. Questoris Companions is fairly obviously the frontrunner here, being both easy to use and versatile. It'll probably be most familiar to returning players, and it'll give new players a healthy starting point to work from. We're also keeping a close eye on Spearheaded Arms for its armiger-centric playstyle, layering buffs on cheap but already effective units. The other detachments are certainly worth a look too, but those stand out among the rest for their immediacy and their clear identities. With so few units and only a few different stat blocks to hang them on, balancing this army is tough. Under or overvaluing a Questoris or Armiger hull can mean the difference between a field covered in giant robots or a shallow junkyard, and Knights of any flavor can become pretty oppressive when they're too cheap. At time of recording, they absolutely are, and any regular 40k player will need to have some plan to deal with dropping a big knight or a pair of armigers every turn, or they'll invariably lose that war of attrition. How good this army will do will rely almost entirely on points, but at the risk of sounding woefully outdated in a month or two, we feel pretty good about this particular codex. It's not quite the slam dunk that Chaos Knights was, but it also hopefully won't quite be the problem that Chaos Knights was either. Imperial Knights didn't need quite as much help to get them more list variety, and we think the detachments in this book are rather good, with all of them warranting at least some play. With these guys more than anyone else, we'll just have to see how the points shake out. If you'd like to learn more about Imperial Knights, or even their spooky Chaos cousins, head over to Goonhammer.com. You can also support us on Patreon for bonus podcasts, Discord access, and bonus features in tabletop battles, or just subscribe to us here on YouTube. I've been Questor McChivalric, and I need to go get a band-aid because my cat seriously cut my hand back there. Thanks for watching.